Thank you for being here today. And the subject for today's webinar is conscious leadership and how does that work in a world that is constantly changing, in a world that very often we hear described as volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous, that VUCA world where we're trying to get marginal gains and shifts all the times in our businesses, our teams, our productivity. And, you know, as we've seen this year, recovering from the pandemic, what's going on economically, there's just change after change and a lot of restructuring going on this year. So let's dig straight into it. Okay, so this webinar is for you if you are a professional or an executive that is going through change yourself, or you are about to. If you are somebody that is trying to, or possibly bouncing back from change, because change, generally speaking, as human beings, because we're human beings, not human doings, we don't like change being done to us. As human beings, we like to be in control. And sometimes when we go through changes, it can take a while to bounce back. Perhaps our confidence is damaged, our ego is damaged, and that's all perfectly fine and natural. In a way, it is fine because it helps you to become more resilient. Or you're leading a team through change. Or you would like some skills to develop resilience, which is a key skill set. So you're a professional going through changes yourself, and you need to develop some resilience or leadership skills. So in fact, that's probably all of us at some point. So at some point, we've all been through it. So I found some data. I like to start off with a bit of data, and then what I'll do is I will talk through what happens during change and how conscious leadership can help you through change. Okay, so here's just some numbers here. Of course, numbers are numbers, but McKinsey, obviously a company that's very, very well steeped in organizational design, restructuring, and I've worked with them quite a lot myself during my career. So they found that up to 82% of executives have experienced organizational redesign in their current companies. So that's a high percentage. 70% of executives, professionals reported that change, redesign, so these are larger scale redesigns, not to mention the micro changes, the smaller changes we might make to a team or a department, that is still change and has a knock-on effect to our teams and how we lead our teams. And the majority of executives in this survey believed that they would experience another redesign in the next year or two. And this last comment really made me laugh, in terms of companies apparently revamp their organizations more often than their websites. I don't think that's the case for me, but then I'm on my own business. But on average, you know, it's every couple of years at least. So I found that quite an interesting statistic to share with you. And the reason I'm sharing these is just to put things into context. As I mentioned, I think this year's been a very, very interesting year. There's been lots of changes going on within corporates. So I just want to reassure you, if you are going through something or you are struggling with a change, it's normal. It's normal in this world, as some of us may know, but some of us may not have gone through it, or we might be leading through it for the first time. So, excuse me, just getting over a cold. The survey reported that the most recent redesign was to help companies execute strategic priorities. So a change in direction, a change in sector. I used to work with a telecoms billing company, and now they're into cloud software, cloud space. Sorry, I'm not technical. So I can see that they've evolved with the times, and good luck to them. They obviously were able to do that and restructure and acquire new people to help them do that. Other reasons, focusing on growth, focusing on better decision making. Sometimes organizations just need to restructure to be more agile, more fluid. The market's changed, so we need to adapt. Cost cutting, 39%. So there are other bigger areas for reasons for redesign. And then accountability was also a big area for corporate and organizational change. So what does this mean for me? Okay, so great statistics, Sarah. What does it mean for me? Well, what it means is it's really normal if you're going through change, and it doesn't have to be a big organizational redesign. It can be something as simple as a change in a reporting line. It can be new reporting lines. It could be, excuse me, the change from remote working to hybrid working, or vice versa. It could be that your team's taking on extra responsibilities. All of those are changes that have an impact on teams and individuals. So please don't think it has to be big organizational shifts like this. So I've been through it myself. So I've definitely been in the trenches. I worked for an organisation where we had 14 mergers and acquisitions in a couple of years. Some of them were quite small bolt-ons, so we didn't always have to announce them. But I was very much in the cut and thrust of change, really dealing with the corporate reputation, communications, working with investor relations. So I was in the heart of it. But sometimes, you know, it did get to a point where I thought, actually, this corporate change might mean I'm working really, really hard now, but I could not be in a job in a while. So that wasn't the case. But I, you know, moved to Germany, moved into the NHS, where there was lots and lots of restructuring. And actually what I found from speaking to my team when there was resistance was that there was change, but nothing changed. And I think that can be a major source of frustration. So we have to make sure it's a legitimate change. So I've been through it. And that washing machine of emotions. Okay. Now, what do my clients tell me? They tell me that I've lost my identity because I was so wedded to my identity and my career progress. Now that I've lost my role or it's changing, I don't know how to cope with that. Or how do I communicate with my team? Because I've always led a team during good news times, and this might be a negative change. And how do I retain that talent? Or it's a positive change, but some people are resistant. How do I lead through that and keep and grow talent? How do I remain positive when I don't know my own personal outcomes as a leader? Or I work with a lot of people. I think one gentleman explained to me that he'd been through 19 restructures in 3 years. He left the organisation because he couldn't take the number of restructures, sort of feeling shattered and burnt out. Too many restructures. What am I going to do, Sarah? Where's my career going now? I don't feel I fit into the new structure, the new vision, the new organisation, but I did before, but I don't know. How do I get through that, Sarah? What's my plan now? Or I've panicked to take in a role that's not for me. I've helped clients through all of these issues and through the other side. So these are all common themes. So we'll cover a bit about change, what happens to teams, what happens to us, the impacts of not dealing with change, conscious leadership and techniques. And then if we have questions, we can put them in the chat box. So I'll just a couple of minutes on my experiences. Obviously, I run Sarah Jones Coaching now. I work with executives and leaders to help build their resilience, modern day forward-thinking conscious leadership, which is not about instructional, directional leadership. There's a time and a place for that, but this is really about aligning to environmental, the ESG goals, diversity and inclusion, and really seeing everyone as an individual working together. So these are some of the companies that I worked at in-house. So I had 30 years corporate experience to board level. I've done a lot of work in pharmaceuticals, and I work with lots and lots of different clients to really help them acquire new skills, understand their blind spots, and get them to lead in a conscious way, which reduces burnout, stress, and helps to retain talent. So I work with individuals and organisations. So change, good or bad? Well, some of us may know the answer to this one. It depends. You can have a good change that doesn't go very well. And in fact, I think the numbers of changes, you know, I'm talking about broader change that fails, is quite high. So a good change can end up going a bit sour, or it could be a bad change, depending on your outlook on life, where you might be personally affected, your team might be. So there are different types of organisational change. This is a classic model around what those changes can look like. Within those, there's different sub-segments of change. It's still change, whether it's good or bad. And as I referred to previously, as human beings, we do like to be in control. The way that our brains work is that when we register a risk or a threat, or just something new and different, our brains go into overdrive. We have a negativity bias. So we, on the whole, we have sort of about, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of thoughts every day. And actually, even though we might not be aware of it, a lot of those can be negative. So we have to really work hard to hold our nerve and make our way through a change, because our brain will sometimes assume it's a negative. It may well be that the way that you approach things as a leader or an executive may affect your results. So we'll come on to that in a bit. So change can be good or bad, or both. So I'm going to go into a bit of this model here, and this is called the Kubler-Ross change model. And some of you may well have heard of this, and this aligns to what I was just been talking about, actually, in terms of how we respond as human beings to changes. So as you can see here, we've got this line where people go through a whole host of different emotions during change, and there's no rhyme or reason. You know, it's not always this linear process. The bottom axis is typically what happens over time, that over time, your team or you personally will start to move to a different phase during this change. You might get to the experiment phase where you think about, well, hang on a minute, how can I deal with this change? How can I help my team deal with this change? And then decide to learn how to work in that new situation. So at the beginning, though, there's a lot of different emotions: shock, denial, frustration. And actually, this model is actually taken from what happens to us when we grieve, in the traditional sense, when we've lost somebody. And it was found that the responses we have as human beings, perfectly natural responses, are the same as if we've lost someone, and particularly if we're very invested in our career. So you've got a whole range of emotions here. And again, it depends where your teams are in terms of, have they been through change before? You know, are they happy in their roles? Are they looking to progress, and now that progression has been stunted because of the change? It depends where they are in their roles, what morale is like, and their competence in terms of dealing with these changes. Just take a sip of water, excuse me. Is it a shock? Is it a surprise? You know, so it's very easy if you're leading a team and you've been involved in conversations around the change that's happening. It's very easy to take it for granted that your team understand the change and okay with it, but very often that's not the case because it will be new to them. So there's a lot of emotions that people go through, and looking at conscious leadership, we need to understand that we can't always hurry people through this process. Everybody's different, and I'll come on to that later when we get into some of the tools and techniques. Now, what happens if we don't help our teams manage through this change? If we don't act in a conscious, forward-thinking, self-aware and aware of other people's styles and preferences, what happens? Or what happens to us if we want to be a conscious executive and we're not moving past this change? Well, what happens is that we go round a washing machine, hence the pictures. What we will find is that people get stuck during certain phases. They'll get stuck in maybe shock, anger, denial. And a lot of that comes down to how you lead your team through change, the resources that are available to them, the processes, for example, all sorts of things that I'll come on to later. So we want to be really guiding our teams consciously and with self-awareness about our own biases and awareness of our teams. It's a bit too late to be building trust if you're going through a big change, if we've not built that trust already, that team environment of trust. And in fact, surveys show that most employees don't trust their bosses, so there's probably a bit of work to do there. I think it depends on the companies. But we don't want our employees, both from a mental health perspective, a well-being perspective, but also from a business perspective, to be going around this loop of, hang on a minute, I can't understand this change, I don't know what's going on, or I'm resistant to it. We have a responsibility as leaders to really help our teams through it. and, you know, as well as those implications for mental health, resilience, confidence. If we don't help our teams through change, if we're moving to a new model, a new structure, a new service, it's not going to work if the teams aren't on board. The teams will stagnate, they will stop. Believe you me, I'm coaching so many companies. There's a couple that I've worked with where I have specifically worked with teams, and the leader said, they're just, you know, kind of quiet quitters. They're just doing what needs to be done and nothing more. I don't really think they're capable. And actually, when I dig through with the leadership team and look at the culture and what's happened in terms of the processes, the people engagement, the engagement with stakeholders that's needed through change, it hasn't happened. So of course the teams are just going to do what they've always done. They've not been led through that change, and it does have an impact on things. I've seen it impact health and safety, performance, all of those kinds of things. So it's really important to guide your teams through it. So let's go into conscious leadership. Some of you may have seen this before if you've been on one of my previous webinars. Conscious leadership is an evolution of transformational leadership, which you probably will have heard of. And conscious leadership really looks at, hang on a minute, we're an organisation, doesn't matter how big or small, and we want to be very aware of what we do as a company from a reputational perspective, from an ESG, the environment, societal and governance measures that are coming into play. You know, and that's being demanded of businesses now in terms of, well, hang on a minute, what's your impact of your supply chain? What are your recruitment processes? What is your gender pay gap report saying? That's a legal requirement now for certain organisations. So it's about being an organisation that has a healthy purpose, that the stakeholders all come together. So it's about employees, suppliers, the leadership. That's the bit we're talking about today, is really important, and the culture. Consciously creating a culture that is healthy for all parties, allows people to flourish, allows us to build resilience and adapt to change, and thinks of ourselves as a citizen in this world, that it's we, not me. And when I say we, not me, there's a time and a place for instructional leadership, but there are other ways to lead in the conscious manner. And as you can see here, it's an evolved sense of capitalism. Yes, obviously companies need to be sustainable, but there are different ways of making a profit. And companies that adopt a conscious leadership approach, conscious leadership being a part of conscious capitalism, they tend to experience higher retention rates, more steady medium to longer term growth. So it's not just looking at profits, it's looking at other areas and impacts on society, and the social objectives that an organisation has, and the way the leaders conduct themselves doesn't override other objectives, and it aims for the development of humanity, society, etc. As in, we want to be a business for good. And there's a book there, Conscious Leadership. There's a few books on conscious leadership. And John Mackey from Whole Foods, I think that's now been bought, really did write a lot about this subject. So it's really thinking about how do we work for the greater good. And of course, as we know, if we take that leadership segment, you know, employees change roles on a regular basis. If we're talking about change, I don't know about you, but I have been made redundant. Actually, I was made redundant twice. And one of them, it's quite ironic because I won this amazing award and then they decided to split the business. So one of them was voluntary. And those two experiences were very different. One of those companies I'd go back to in a heartbeat, one I would not. And it's about the way I was treated. And actually, I eventually was a client of that company, of one of the companies. So we just have to be aware that employees will push back now, particularly younger generations. Employees do have a voice. They do expect things of their leadership, or despite the current climate, they will move. They expect different things from their roles. So we have to be aware of that. And actually, as a leader, we want to have a fulfilling leader or executive. We want to have a fulfilling career. And if you take the conscious leadership approach, you reduce burnout, you retain talent, and you have a high-performing team that spots innovation because you've created that culture where you're co-creating together. Okay, Sometimes it's called above the line or below the line leadership. This is very much aligned to mindset. Mindset is, in case you don't know, the way that we see things, the way that we view the world, our approach to life. You can either have a very closed, fixed mindset below the line, or you can have an open mindset, which is much more attuned to learning, even during times of challenge. You know, I'm a big one for positive thinking because we do have to override that negativity bias in our brains. However, life does chuck curved balls at us. So we have to, in order to thrive and survive and build resilience, be open and curious, committed to learning, committing to challenge our biases when we're leading, not be closed off. When we're closed off, when we're below the line, you watch how many people will leave your team, how the business suffers and stagnates. It doesn't matter what size it is. If you're above the line, you're open to feedback, and some of the attributes of conscious leadership I will go on to in a bit. So it's an evolution of transformational leadership. So this is the conscious leadership model of change, okay? And you've got these 3 circles here. And in the middle, you've got change leadership, and it's conscious change leadership. So we've got conscious leadership during change. And in the middle there, you can see, I'm not going to read everything out, how you transform through change, what you do as a leader, how aware or conscious you are about what you are doing in these different buckets, help you to lead yourself. When you lead yourself, you can then lead others. You can then create that culture and evolve as a leader and as a team. Very often when I work with clients, I do a lot of work in leadership communications as well, because my background was in corporate affairs and communications. I very often hear leaders say, well, how can I get my employees to do that? How can I get my employees to do that? And actually, that's the wrong word. It's about how you attract people to your organization, how you create an environment where they want to stay. And we do that through conscious leadership. And that's around understanding our mindset, our behaviors, what presence we bring to the table, self-mastery. So you've got self-awareness, self-esteem, self-awareness, self-leadership, self-mastery, where you've learned to deal with challenges. And just to finish off the point on positive thinking, whilst I'm a big proponent of positive thinking, sometimes I think the key in life and business is rolling with the punches. That's where sometimes, unfortunately, we do get the growth. As long as we learn to work through the changes and help our team. So this is about conscious change. Why are we doing this? Why is this change necessary? Have we really thought about it? Are our leaders really geared up to be conscious leaders, ensuring diversity, that we have that conscious leadership model in place, which I have my own model. Are we coaching people rather than telling them what to do all the time? Are we growing people? Are we adapting? Are we co-creating? And co-creation is an important word in conscious leadership. It's about coming together and identifying innovation, identifying how to lead through change, identifying and getting feedback from the change. And that's something very important, because companies, as I mentioned, that adopt this approach tend to grow much more on a sustainable level over time. They generate much better feedback from employees. And also, I quote this statistic quite a lot. Your employees typically know 84% of your problems. The leadership team don't always know what the problems are because they're busy doing other things. Depends on the size of the business, okay? So it's really important to have that culture of feedback. So here's a model that I wanted to share with you. And again, this could be, there's some tips here that will work for you on a personal level, or if you fit into the category of having to lead your team through change. And as I say, it can be a very, very small change, or it can be a larger scale change. Excuse me a minute. And just to explain, when teams go through change, there's a model that demonstrates that the team comes together, so it forms. Some of you may have heard of this model, and it's a typical team model. The team comes together, it forms. And during that forming stage, it's very polite. People are getting used to each other, learning how to work together. And then teams can go through a storming phase. That means that actually there's a bit of friction. So it's important during that phase to address that friction, clear up misunderstandings, have things like clear role descriptions that you agree, co-create with your teams, have a clear vision. Because at that phase, after that polite phase, the storming phase can get a bit messy if you're not careful and can derail the team. So, and then if you get through that storming process, and perhaps that's something I can talk about in a future webinar, then you get to performing. Now, if you get stuck in storming, which is where changes happen, that's not particularly productive for the team or the business. It's going to suck up a lot of your time. So what we have to be able to do is lead teams through that change. So that's reiterating the point that when I'm talking about change here, it could be big, could be something as simple as we're offering a new service, we are, I don't know, changing how we work, because what seems small to you might seem big to another person. What seems big to you might seem small to another person. I work with people that take big organizational change under their stride, but I've worked with people that come to me during the first session sort of really broken because, as I say, they've wedded their identity on what they do to their job. They had it all mapped out. Now that's out of the window. And after a couple of sessions, they're definitely seeing things in a different way. So this model is really, really helpful. So there's a drama triangle that goes on here. And sometimes, you know, we play different roles. And I see this coming up during change. You might see victim behavior, which is very much this closed mindset, being closed to change, and villain mindset. Well, whose fault is that? Da, 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 da. Then you get the hero, somebody that's like, don't worry, I can just get on with it. That's fine. I can handle it. And it's just worth being aware of this triangle, because it does, and this actually works for your personal life as well as your professional life. You might find some of your teams or yourself stuck in one of these positions, and we don't want to be stuck there. If we come from a victim closed mindset, and that is not to say that how you feel, how your teams feel is not justified. Absolutely, everybody has valid feelings. It's about how you express them and can you move through them. You know, so as a leader, you might have to help your team through some of these phases. You might have to have conversations to help them through this. Well, hang on a minute, I'm just blaming X, Y, and Z, you know, and it's worth thinking about your own behaviors. Maybe in the past, you know, you can reflect on where you felt this way. I think if you've done a lot of self-awareness and self-development, you notice these little reactions and you move past them quite quickly and reframe your thinking. Because let's face it, working around people who are in the victim mindset or the villain mindset, it's not very empowering for teams. It's not very helpful for innovation or growth or development. So we need to be careful that as conscious leaders, we're taking a temperature check on this. So that's quite a useful graphic. I've just skimmed the detail, I've skimmed over the model there, but it's worth being aware of them. So what we don't want during conscious leadership and conscious leadership practices, particularly during change, where I've talked about that drama triangle that people can get stuck in. I've talked about the change curve, the emotions, and people can get stuck in that if we don't help them through. I've talked about the forming, the norming, and the storming of teams. It's a typical team model. We don't want that to affect other people, affect ourselves, or affect the development that needs to happen, the change that needs to happen, because usually it's for a good reason. Hopefully it is. Hopefully, perhaps you're working within a company, and I have seen it, and I have worked with companies and teams on this, as in, is this change really necessary? So we don't want autopilot leadership. What do I mean by this? We want conscious leaders. We want that above the line leadership. So throughout your day, have a think about whether you're leading a team or you're going through a change. Am I above the line, below the line? Am I being a bit fixed, a bit defensive? That's below the line. So I need to sort of come up a bit and think about, well, I can't control everything. This is change. Everything's going to work out. You know, I'm feeling anxious at the moment, and that's okay. I'm feeling a bit fearful at the moment. That's okay. Notice those words at the moment. You know, it's not going to last forever, hopefully. So we don't want autopilot. So having explored those models that I've talked about and how we tend to behave, as a conscious leader, we need a level of self-awareness. And in all the coaching that I do, basically, a lot of what I do is shifting people's mindsets to see things differently. If we see things in a pre-programmed way, oh, that person does that, they're always like that, in a negative way, we're going to get that reflected back to us, because then we enact that in our lives. So a lot of my work is really around, yes, traditional skills, delegation, stress, burnout management, teamwork. But a lot of the work I do is actually around raising your self-awareness and your mindset to better cope with the changes that you might be going through in your career. So conscious leadership is really a mindset shift. And in fact, for me, leadership is a mindset. For me, leadership is about the way you do things. You know, do you let things happen to you in your private life? Well, that's not really leading yourself in your private or personal life. The same is true of our own careers, career development. We want to be conscious of the choices we're making and the conversations we're having, and aware of what we want. So conscious leadership is not autopilot. It's really about exploring, hang on a minute, have I got an assumption? And again, if you're not a leader and you're an executive going through a change, then explore your assumptions as well. Well, I've seen this change as all bad. It could be, but hang on a minute. Does it present another opportunity for me? Or does it allow me to grow my role? Or does it allow me to make a new career decision that I've always wanted to do? So, and with your team, if you are leading a team, making assumptions about your team are like, oh, well, they're never going to buy this, or perceptions you have of other people. And I'm not trying to criticize anyone. We're all human beings. We're not robots. You know, within 7 seconds of meeting people, we've made a judgment based on those visual cues. You know, 70 to 80% of communication is not what you say, but how you say it, how you come across. So yeah, we need to bust through those tried and tested methods and really think about asking yourself, what assumptions am I making? Am I biased towards something? This shapes how you see things. It's causative. If you see something as negative, guess what? You're going to see it, what you're going to enact is something negative, because people will pick up on your behaviors, how you are around them. It influences our decisions. Well, there's no point trying. I'm using very, very extreme examples here. You know, I'm not saying that everything you envisage positively will work out, but you've got a better chance of that happening, because our internal feelings seep out through body language, decisions, language we use, how we present ourselves. And when we do that as a leader, it causes a lot of fluctuations in human behaviours, dynamics in our team. And we really want to look after our teams. And I'm hoping that's why you're on this webinar, or we want to look after our own careers, okay? And look after ourselves consciously. We have to understand that there's more to people than what we see on the outside. Where people, we've talked about that change curve earlier. Those emotions, the ones that are more about fear, shock, denial, they are much more about feeling hurt or feeling angry, and there's a fear behind everything. Any negative behavior, there's a fear. So we need to ask, what do I think that person's afraid of? Have I asked them, what am I afraid of? Once you see it and face it, you take away that the fear of that power, if you write it down and understand what's happening. So this causes a lot of turmoil. So we really need that self-awareness, seeking awareness of other people, and I'll come on to that in a bit, and engaging with other people on a one-to-one level, yes, as a team, but it's going to involve potentially a lot of your time as a leader to help people through change. And helping them through change might be helping them to make a decision to leave the company, but you can still do that in a conscious, mindful way. And What we're hearing a lot more of now is boomerang employees. I mean, there's one organisation, a pharma company, that I've worked for 3 times, and you know, I've got fond memories of them. I've had different experiences across different departments, by the way, some more positive than others, but because I had such a great positive experience when I was contracting, I worked for them 3 times. So people are boomeranging, coming back to organisations, or you might be wanting to retain people. You might have the ability to say, look, let's work together. We want to retain you. What can we meaningfully give you to do? Involve them in the change, for example, that can help you as well. So all of these things can be handled consciously. It's going to make you feel better. It's going to help the other person feel better as well, and your company's reputation. So that self-awareness is critical. So what we don't necessarily want is that kind of I'll just get on with it attitude. This has got to come from you. It's got to come from your own self-awareness, being aware of how you're coming across to people, which is this evolution of transformational leadership. It's coming from, I call it inside out leadership. And there you've got a lady with a hand on the mirror. It's about really looking at ourselves and examining and understanding our own behaviours, reactions. Why are we reacting instead of just responding, sitting back, thinking mindfully? Hang on a minute, let's not rush into that. When do I get stressed? When do I get triggered? When do I go into mandate mode, as in, this is the way it is? Obviously, if you're in a building and it's on fire, you do want directional leadership, as in, get to the fire exits and get out of the building. But during change, it just doesn't work like that. Okay. You know, even if the change hasn't been consciously designed, you can still play a role. And, you know, I would start, even if your organization perhaps doesn't have that conscious culture, why don't you start? Why don't you build that conversation? Because when you change your behaviors, reactions from other people change. I remember working with a client once who was having a lot of friction, and a lot of people avoid conflict. And actually conflict can be simple misunderstandings, and it makes it worse. It builds things up. So she was working with somebody and couldn't really deal with his assertiveness that bordered into aggressiveness. So we set some boundaries, had that adult open, aware conversation. It wasn't a mandate that you have to change. It was a two-way conversation, win-win, and they get on really, really well now. They respect each other, and she realised, well, actually, I'm seeing that behaviour in that way with my bias. So it does work. So trust. It starts with you. Are you willing to grow your mindset, have a flexible mindset, grow your self-awareness? It's really important that you understand your team's personalities. For example, and I'm talking in generalities, do you understand your own profile? So I use DISC, I know about insights. If you're someone that has what we call blue energy, predominantly blue energy it's called, it means that you're quite a cool person, introvert, analytical. During times of change, you can say to that person, oh, well, come on, ask me questions, speak up. They're probably not going to do it, particularly during change. They're going to retreat into the data. They're going to retreat into the details and close off a bit. Be aware of that. If you've got somebody that is high yellow energy, which is a very outgoing, people-focused, likes recognition type personality, they might go over the top with trying to help and burn themselves out. So be aware of that. Everybody's different, and they have their own timeline. But by explaining some of these concepts today as well, that will help them through this process. We want to connect personally and individually. Some of the characteristics we need to grow, develop, and I'm sure some of you have them already, is being authentic. You have to be real with people. This isn't the time to sort of lie or make things up, because then you just lose that trust. And I've put trust at the top. You know, trust, there are common causes of dysfunctional teams. Fear of conflict, so not addressing conflict, which can be simple misunderstandings, a lack of trust, lack of commitment. Commitment can drop off during change, and particularly post-change. No accountability, and not really focusing on goals. So those tend to be some of the 5 key dysfunctions. And as I mentioned before, 84% of executives don't seem to trust their leaders. So we have to work extra hard to do that. And if you are leading a team, managing a team, I argue that you should be spending over at least half of your time with people, understanding them, growing them. So think about that if you're thinking about a leadership career that you want to be successful. And all of this, it might require time and effort, but it saves time in the longer term, and it stops a lot of burnout within the team and burnout for yourself that you're taking things on that you don't need to. So we have to understand people's personalities, understand their timelines, and we have to let go of control. So this mandate, just get on with it type approach. I don't know if you've heard it, perhaps you've got phrases, that's just the way we do things here. That's another one. We need to let that go. We need to just let it go. Just because it's always been said doesn't mean it's always right. So successful organizations involve personal growth and change, because even though you might be going through a technological change, a process change, there's still human behaviors that need to enable that change to happen and for it to happen in the future. So this is where this inside out, above the line leadership comes from. So being authentic, innovation. Best way to be innovative is building trust with your team, having that feedback culture, being open, creating together where you can, but being really honest to build that trust and not tell them what you can tell them, but sometimes just say, look, I just don't have the answer, or I can't tell you that at the moment. I would if I could. And having those great conversations, but also one-to-ones, compassion, resilience, patience, empathy and integrity. So maybe if you're in a large organization, you can influence your leaders upwards by demonstrating some of these behaviors and create your own conscious change culture. Conscious leaders know that change isn't linear. So we have to think about it as a conscious leader in terms of we're in this together. As I mentioned before, there's no going fast, go slow to go fast later. We need stakeholder input, suppliers it may be, employees, of course, our team, early and often. Don't over communicate, because we need to have a reason for communicating. And I've worked with organizations and teams that are like, well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to communicate, I'm going to send out an email. Why? What's the purpose of that? What's the objective? Why don't you just go and have conversations with people and make sure they understood what you said the last time? So we want that stakeholder input. We do want to communicate. We want fair process as well. It goes without saying. So we want culture change to be integrated throughout the change, not separate. So it's not like, here's the change, here's the culture. So we want conscious leadership and a conscious organisation that meets the criteria it needs to these days. Then we need that cultural change to be embedded within the change process. So if we are moving to an agile organisation, the processes and cultures need to match. If we are moving to a culture of needing to show more accountability and process, that's going to have to be the way that we demonstrate, walk the walk and talk the talk of the change, i.e. culture. Employee engagement and involvement, not one way, that's broadcast, that's not engagement. We need to provide resources to our teams, provide processes, perhaps we need to provide them with a buddy, a mentor, you know, even a counsellor if they're going through a tough time, they're really concerned, to ensure that the teams can feel involved as they can be. You might not be able to tell them everything if it's a big change, but we want them involved, and the more involved they are, the more likely you are to have success and be up and running more swiftly with your change than if you don't. And actually you might miss things, because I've worked in changes in large, small, medium organizations, and very often the leadership team has come up with a change, and then we've gone through, spoken to a department, and that department said, well, actually we can't do that this way because that's not compliant, or it's not compliant with our IT systems. So that's invokes a whole other change. So it's really important. So, and in that way, we empower people. They feel like they have some agency in the change. Listening, you know, not telling people, not mandating, listening, coaching, asking questions. Get comfortable asking questions. As a conscious leader, you don't need to have all the answers. You just need to have a good set of ears and perhaps ask the right questions, be truly interested in helping people. Walk the walk, be visible, don't just disappear if this change is happening, because if you start changing behaviours and patterns, that can really worry people. Legitimise feelings, even if internally you might be thinking, what? I don't know where that person got that from. Why can't they just move on? We can't really be like that. We need to provide support and legitimise their feelings and help them through it. And sometimes helping them through that might mean that they're leaving. That's fine. Sometimes that's for the best. Don't rubbish the past. So don't, you know, that sounded very instructional by the way, but if you've got an organisation, you know, it's like a marriage, right? Okay, if you divorce, it doesn't always mean your marriage was a failure. It just means at this point in time, it stopped working. You both want different things, or it's not working for various reasons. That doesn't mean that every single part of that marriage pre-divorce is a failure. The same in business. It doesn't mean that if you're splitting the company or you're changing your processes, that everything before was rubbish. I'm sure it wasn't, but it's just the next stage in your evolution. And we don't want our employees, our teams, to be hearing that we're criticising the organisation as well, because they question, well, what have I been doing here then? So yeah, so those are some of the tactics that you can use in conscious leadership. And again, I would say that visibility is really, really important. Being aware of your own prejudice and biases, being aware of your own mindset, asking questions, using a coaching approach, having a clear plan for yourself around how am I going to communicate, what formats, when am I going to do that? Not just on a team level, but on an individual level. Ask your teams, what is it you need from me? Seek that feedback. Or, okay, the implications of this changes this. So it's about getting that stakeholder input. You're going to have to talk to your clients. So we want to go into those meetings with our clients and customers, thinking about what we're going to say with our suppliers. So it's really about just coaching yourself as well, you know, looking at how you do things and really adjusting to be visible, to ensure that we take people on that change with us. Otherwise they get lost in the washing machine, and we don't want that. So it's really important that I think this conscious change is brought into play, that we are thinking about this change. And actually, do you know what? I've worked with companies where they've started to introduce a change and they've reversed it because it's like, we haven't done the thinking. Sometimes we rush, you know, it's such a busy world, we rush. And that's not always the best way to be. Conscious leadership is about deliberate action, as in knowing that we can't control that other person's emotions. We can't always make it better straight away, but we can help. And we want to do that so the business continues to succeed, so we're not stressed, so our teams aren't stressed, and they continue to perform. So I've walked through quite a few concepts here. I've touched the surface here about what conscious change looks like. I've touched the surface here on some of the things that you can do, some of the behaviours you need to exhibit, how to look at your mindset. So if there are more specifics you'd like to know about, then my contact details are at the end of the slides, which we'll be sending out afterwards. I also want to announce that I'm launching 2 monthly masterminds, because I found that a lot of people are coming to me not knowing how to adapt to this rapidly changing world or some of the challenges of today. And I wanted to produce something where people, you know, people sometimes that I talk to feel very isolated and lonely as a manager. It can be very lonely sometimes to make decisions and not have anyone to bounce off. So what I'm creating is 2 monthly groups. One is for aspiring conscious leaders and one's for aspiring women in leadership. And what I'm looking to provide is a 90-minute Zoom call each month. You'll get a recording, and then there'll be a private secure group in LinkedIn where I'll be adding in tips and content, questions you might want to ask yourselves, you know, content throughout the week, in and out of the calls. And then you as members of this community can then add your own questions, your own comments, ask questions to the group. It's all completely confidential. So nobody outside of the group, of which I'm aiming for about 10 people in each group, You're all there to support each other. There's quotes about when more than one is gathered, we make more progress. Problem shared is a problem halved. So that's what I'm launching. If you choose to join either of these groups, then there's a discount on coaching for you or your organisation, and you know that you've got support when you need it in a safe space. And you know, you're in a group of people that are in similar positions, might have a different perspective, good networking as well. So yeah, if you would like to know more about that, then please do get in touch with me on LinkedIn or my email address, which is my website's here, sarah@sarah-j.com. You can reach me there. And yeah, so I'll finish off the presentation now because we're just on time. Happy to take any questions. And yeah, thank you for joining. I think we didn't have any questions at the moment. I know that somebody asked me before about what does conscious leadership do for an organisation. I think I've answered that throughout. So obviously what I'll do afterwards is share the recording and also the information about those mastermind groups that I've just shared. I've had a lot of questions about those. So it is about 10 spaces per group. So they can't be, I don't want them to get too huge. I want them to be small, concise groups where you can get the input you need. I'm trying to think, there was somebody else yesterday that asked me a question. Yeah, they asked me about some of the attributes of conscious leadership. There's a document, you might find it online, called the 15 attributes, characteristics, 15 commitments of conscious leadership. And when we talk about 15 commitments, I don't want you to worry and think about, well, if I go down this conscious leadership path, I have to commit to all of these all the time. It's actually just about, hang on a minute, what state can I be in? It's not so, you know, they are commitments, but they're not. It's like, don't put pressure on yourself. Some of the things around candor, honesty, trust are really, really important. So what can you commit to? Try it one by one and then, you know, review it over time. I use psychometric profiling as well. That's really helpful. I do a work of leaders report, which demonstrates how conscious you are in your leadership, where you need to go, and all sorts of other psychometric tools, such as self-mastery, personal effectiveness, listening. So there's lots of different tools that we can use to help you become more aware of your leadership style and then see where you are. We can benchmark you in terms of your conscious leadership, which is an evolving school of thought that is becoming more and more popular as I say, an evolution of transformational leadership. So that was from one of my clients yesterday, just asking about the commitments. So yeah. So I think I will leave it there for the day. Thank you very much for joining. We'll send around the information as promised. And if you do have any questions, get in touch with me on LinkedIn. Drop me an email, and obviously the masterminds, I'm starting to recruit people into the masterminds now, making sure we've got people that are definitely committed to their leadership journey and the health and well-being of their teams. Okay, thank you very much. Have a great day. Bye.